However, Meir Kahane can't be so easily dismissed. Even as he is denounced by Israeli and American Jewish leaders alike, his support, especially among the young and the poor, increases. In Israel, Kahane is thought of by many as a real threat to the future of that beleaguered democracy. His actions and ideas, like his insistence that, quote, the very idea of a democratic Jewish state is nonsense. A state can be permanently defined as Jewish or as democratic, but never both, end quote. These are anathema to most concerned and thoughtful Jewish leaders here in the United States and to most highly placed Israelis who fear that his xenophobia will be misunderstood as representing the attitudes of the only real democracy in the Mideast. 5. In an op-ed piece in the New York Times, you wrote, and it may have seemed contemptuously to me and to others, of an insane servitude to democracy and morality. And I wonder how far that contempt, if that's what it is, finally will carry you in nations, Israel and the United States, devoted both to democracy and to morality.
I think that probably the greater issue is how long will we have a contempt for logic? To call names is easy, and defamation is really the very last refuge of non-thinkers. When I say that democracy and a Jewish state are simply at opposite poles, incompatible, that's sheer logic. A Jewish state, Israel, Zionism, came into being to create a state in which Jews would be the group that ran Israel, the majority. If Jews are not a majority, it's not a Jewish state. Democracy says it doesn't matter who is the majority, Jews, non-Jews. If the Zionists, not Kahane, the Zionists, Theodor Herzl, Ben Gurion, Abba Eban, who speak of a democratic Jewish state, but what happens if I ask them the question, do the Arabs have a right to quietly, peacefully, democratically become a majority? Have they that right, or haven't they in a Jewish state?
Mike?
I think, forgive me for suggesting that maybe you're evading the issue. What kind of a Jewish state would what you call a Torah state be? Could my kids go to a soccer game on Saturday? Could my daughter have a civil wedding? Could a Reform rabbi practice his beliefs? Could I play tennis when I wanted to? Would it be a democratic Jewish state? Put the Arab question aside momentarily.
All right, if you want to put that aside, fine, but just bear in mind that whether one is an Orthodox Jew or an atheist Jew, if he is a Zionist, he can't allow democracy.
Now,
I understand that, and now
I know that
you're
militantly anti-secularist.
And now I'll
in this country, that seems to be a serious issue.
I think that democracy means that a majority rules, and I am for democracy for the Jewish people. Now that means that if the majority of Jews in Israel go to the polls, elect Kahane, and give me that power, of course I would like to have a state based upon Jewish law, Torah law, and of course the Sabbath will be kept. But every 4 years, you can go to the polls and choose a second party, a different party. If any state forces people to do things, there are many, many things that I find in Israel now to be things that are opposite, against everything that I believe. Nevertheless, a majority of Jews voted, and they voted for it. I accept it. If a majority of Jews will say that the Sabbath will be kept as the Sabbath, people won't ride, then people won't ride. All you have to demand, and rightly so, and properly so, is the right every 4 years to change that system, and that you will have.
But for 4 years, I wouldn't be able to go to the supermarket on Saturday if you're elected.
That's right. And for many, many, many years, people couldn't go on Sunday to stores because those stores were closed. That did not make this country less of a liberal state, a democratic state. The fact that you don't like laws has nothing to do with democracy.
I didn't say that. You know
Midge?
that.
I would like to ask you something about your movement. I have here some passages from a handbook for Kach activists. You mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, that it's not a matter of name-calling, it's a matter of logic. And I found something very interesting in the logic in these passages. May I quote from them, please? It won't take me long. Here is a quote. "Don't argue with leftists. They should immediately be silenced with a sharp retort. PLO, fascist, racist, communist." And another passage. "It should be remembered that most Kach supporters and sympathizers do not fully grasp all Kach's ideology. Therefore, in all home circles and get-togethers, it is important to concentrate on specific issues. Only a small nucleus of activists really needs to understand this platform." Sir, I submit that this is not a Jewish passage. It could have been written by the late V.I. Lenin.
Let me first of all take the first passage, because actually there are two different concepts there. What you have is something given you and taken out of context. That first thing dealt with how does one respond to leftists when we're at a rally and they are shouting at us. What do you do? Do you know how many of my rallies have been physically broken up with stones and with eggs by leftists? The question, therefore, is, what does one do? When I'm called a Nazi, I don't sit and say, "Come, let us reason together." Not at that point. That's why that was said. As far as the other point is concerned, we were speaking about when one comes to a neighborhood, you don't sit and talk about the entire views of Kach or any other movement. We concentrate upon issues. We are a party, and we want to get votes. Obviously, you concentrate on those issues which those people most feel strongly about. Anyone would say that. Anyone would say that. I have written books which are most abundantly frank. And anyone who wants to can read that book or those books. There's one thing. I have never hidden my views. Never.
Well, that's certainly true. We know that you haven't hidden your views, and we also know that politicians always concentrate on issues that are of particular concern to a particular constituency. This passage, however, seems to me to be reminiscent of the idea that there should be a cadre. Now, I belong to a Democratic political party. It's called the Democratic Party, God help me, in the United States. There is no notion of a cadre, though there are politicians who undoubtedly emphasize particular issues and not others. But there is no notion that you create a cadre and the others don't need to know everything. And the issue that I raised was, it seems to me that this is hardly in keeping. Leave aside the democratic question. This is hardly in keeping, this idea, with your notion of a Jewish state, or a specifically and uniquely Jewish state, or a uniquely Jewish party which looks forward to a uniquely Jewish state. It just sounds to me as if we learned about how to create movements from a genius at creating a minority movement which could exert great disruptive power on the majority. His name was Lenin, and he would have used and did indeed use exactly this kind of concept.
The only difference is that Lenin did not allow people to vote and go to the polls, and I would. And I put it to you that that's quite a difference, quite a difference.
So we're going to have to take a break here. When we come back, I think we ought to look at that difference and see how much of a distinction there is. Thanks very much. Full strength in Israel.
Oh, no. I think that there is really a great latent strength for Kach within Sephardic Jews, those Jews who come from Arab countries, and young people. I think that that comes from the fact that they didn't learn about Arabs at some seminar, but they lived under Arabs, and they never again want to. I think that I say what they think. Indeed, I say what many, many people think in Israel.
When the next election comes in Israel, how do you think that will be reflected?
I think that we will be the third largest party. I think that if the Likud wishes to form a government, it will have to deal with my party, Kach. I think so, and they do too.
Do you think that the triumph of LaRoche in the state of Illinois, and you must know something about it, not long ago in this country indicated the kind of support that you have?
Of course not.
Do you think yours is much greater?
First of all, I think that's a pretty dirty question to ask.
What's the nature of a dirty? How do you define a dirty question? There are dirty answers.
Because
perhaps.
As soon as you say a person's name and then say, does that have anything to do with you? It has nothing to do with me. What is the connection between me? Why don't you ask?
The connection is an electoral victory.
Do you think that the victory of the moderate right in France shows your gains? Why a person who is a neo-Nazi? That's a dirty thing.
Do you identify yourself with a moderate party?
I say that I am a Jew who bases all of my views on Torah, and the things that I say are Judaism, and people who talk to me of Jewish values and who wouldn't know a Jewish concept if they tripped over one are the kinds of people that I think give the news media the image that it properly deserves, not a very, very fair one.
Let me ask why you think that since August of '85, when the Smith research poll in Israel and other polls put your popularity at about 9%, in March that figure was down to 3%. Why are you campaigning here? Maybe you ought to be beating the drum back in Israel. That's a pretty serious drop, don't you think? Why do you think it happened?
Sir, if I believed in polls, I would have stopped running for Knesset a long, long time ago. I wasn't impressed by that poll that gave me 9% or 3%. I know my strength because I go out nightly to rallies. I see the crowds, enthusiasm. So when Mr. Smith polls people at the King David Hotel or such types, let him go out to where the overwhelming majority of people live, in the poor neighborhoods, development towns. That's where the action is, and those are the people who elected Menachem Begin, and those today are my people. So let's not look at polls. And if I was really dropping, Shimon Peres and Chaim Herzog would not be obsessed daily with Kahane. They wake up each morning with Kahane.
Midge?
I don't know that I am altogether learned in Jewish concepts, but I'm not altogether ignorant either. I would like to ask you one question. Is it true that the Jewish Defense League, which was organized by you in this country before you left for Israel, and which is still, I think, extant, is it true that the Jewish Defense League engaged in bombings, as I believe you told a woman named Carla Hall, a reporter for the Washington Post? Is that true? Is it, or is it not true, that the Jewish Defense League still believes in the value of violence like bombings? And I would like you to relate that to Jewish concepts.
Of course, we bombed Russian offices. We did. And I'm always impressed by liberals who can well understand violence when it is done in South Africa, because those are freedom bombs, or in El Salvador, because that is a freedom bomb, or the Black Panthers have to be understood. And yet, when after 50 years of abject silence on the part of nice Jews, when suddenly Jews do those things for other Jews, you inquire about violence. Now, about Judaism, When the Bible says there is a time for war and a time for peace, there's a time for war and a time for peace. I would hope that you weren't upset by the Allied bombing of German cities in World War II. And don't tell me but that was a war, because that has very, very little to do with ethics, because we're in a war too. So, of course, violence is a terrible thing. Sometimes it's necessary.
By that logic, is PLO bombing justified?
No, by that logic, the war of independence of Israel was justified.
Why is PLO bomb? I happen to share Mitch's view that bombing is contemptible. But by just on a logical basis, why would not Libyan terrorist bombing be justified?
Because only people that have difficulty in understanding things properly, in understanding moral values properly, would find the German bombing of Coventry and the British bombing of Germany the same thing. There is good and there is evil. And if you are a follower of people that feel that there is no such thing as an objective good, objective evil, then why did you hang Eichmann? There is evil, and it is proper to use violence against evil. Now, the question is, who is evil? Well, if you don't know what is evil, then you have a great, great problem. I am a Jew. I have my values based upon Judaism, and I can decide on that basis what is evil. Thank God during World War II, the Americans had no such problem.
You know, some time back, not terribly long ago, Elie Wiesel sat at this table, and he said, I was in Israel in '67, and I will not forget, I don't want to forget, the human way in which the Israeli soldiers treated the enemies. There was no hate in the Israeli soldier. I said that was true in '67. Do you think it's true today? And he, not a journalist, not someone you can dismiss quite that way, and that is easy to do, said, I think it's true today as well, with some exceptions. Unfortunately, there is now a small segment in Israel which is racist, which embarrasses me as a Jew. I don't know whether they and I belong to the same people, whether they and I claim kinship with the same tradition. Judaism cannot be racist. I believe the Jewish tradition is one of compassion, must be one of compassion. It's a small segment, not Israel. Israel as such, I believe, is still human and humanely inspired, and he did, of course, direct himself to the question of bombings and violence. So there is a tradition, a very large tradition, in Israel, certainly, and among Jews everywhere, that does not embrace the position that you take. I guess you would grant that.
No. Why do you quote a person, an author, and call him Judaism? He is a Jew. He's not Judaism. The fact is that when the Bible speaks of what Joshua did when the Israelites entered Canaan, that may be Judaism. Now, if Mr. Wiesel has problems with that, that's his problem. There's no question about that, and he can burn his local Bible. I have no problems with that. Nevertheless, I would venture to say that if Mr. Wiesel would live in Israel and know Israel more and speak to the soldiers in the Israeli army, he might have a different view than that from the Upper West Side.
Well, I guess what Americans have to do, and perhaps Jews everywhere, is make the choice then between Kahane and Wiesel, but that's the point at which I get the signal to stop, and you've made your point, and thank you very much for joining us today.